now listening to the Arsenal Therapy Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the 15-minute show. It's been a while since we were last on, but we were launching a brand new scouting series where we're going to be looking at a handful of strikers. And I'm here with Ben Mattinson to discuss Viktor Gyökeres. For those who don't know Ben, you should do. He's one of the best people on Twitter in terms of scouting players. He's also a football analyst and a scout as for his job. And Ben is here with me today to discuss Gyökeres. He does some incredible threads on Twitter with very, very detailed breakdowns. And today we're going to look at Gyökeres' numbers, but most importantly, the things that you can't see in the numbers, and look at the eye test. Ben, how are you doing today?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to getting to it.
So Gyökeres is one of those. We hear he's going to cost around 65 million euro to 70 million euro. The figure very much differs, but it's clear he's going to leave Sporting this year. In terms of his career to date, what's kind of the key things that you'd be looking at for within his skill set that would be making him move to the right club this summer?
Yeah, I think the team, how do they play to his strengths? Do they limit his weaknesses, if that makes sense? Like, for example, if you've got someone who isn't the best finisher and you put them in the situation where they're the main guy that has to get you a load of goals, like, it doesn't make sense. So you've got someone there who's a great channel runner, put him in a situation, a team, and an environment where they're constantly going to play the early ball in behind the defense, then you're making the most of that. So that's the biggest thing for me, because at Sporting, particularly when they had Amorim, a big part of their system, everyone knows about it now, Man United fans, the 3 centre-backs, very progressive, the 2 centre midfielders. The one thing he's not quite done yet is because they've got different profiles, but at Sporting, the wing-backs were more like wingers, and they would quickly play the pass in behind. And then you had 2 number 10s that were creative. They would run to the run the channels, run to the byline, create cutbacks. So everything in the team is about here playing the ball to the striker. So if you've got a striker who runs in behind and can finish, great. That, you know, we talk about someone on the air, on the ground, not stuff in the air. It's all in behind, cutbacks, things like that. That's where he shines. So you've got to play to that.
Yeah, and he definitely has shone because of that system, and also because of the determination. One of the things we've heard a lot about is his focus, determination, that kind of selfish streak that runs through a lot of great strikers, the desire to continue to improve. And ultimately, I think the bit that really stands out and will attract a lot of Arsenal fans to him is just that sheer desire to put the ball in the back of the net. He wants to score goals. He wants to be that killer. So just looking at some of the information around him. So Gyökeres is 26. He turns 27 on the 4th of June. And he is entering into his prime years right now. I know people say there's no sell-on value if you buy Gyökeres. I don't quite buy that, because I think there is sell-on value for players that score goals. If he was to come to Arsenal for 3 years, for example, scored goals, and Arsenal decided they wanted to upgrade, there will be plenty of takers. You won't get back what you've paid for him, but you will get a lot of value during that time, and possibly still sell on for around 30 million. At a striker at 30, especially one who's such a late bloomer, there is no reason why you can't still sell them on at a decent fee in a few years' time, but you won't make a big profit off it. You might get half of what you've paid, or you may even get more depending on the form he's in. But he is very much a true centre forward. There's no frills around his game. It's what I would call one-dimensional. He very much gets the ball, wants to go towards goal, and he will find whatever the best option is to get there. But he's got another 3 years left on his contract at Sporting, but there is that gentleman's agreement. Whether it's a actual release clause or a gentleman's agreement, he is going to be allowed to leave this summer. Transfermarkt rate him at being valued around 75 million euro, which is just slightly above what the fee is to let him go. And what do you think, first of the fee being quoted for Gyökeres?
It's fair enough. Yeah, I think I would say fair value for him would be about 50 million pounds. So yeah, that's about it. I think when you think of his age, you've missed maybe one of his prime years, maybe, and then he's got. But the fact that he's a bit of a late bloomer as well, I think you've got a good 3 years there that should be at a top level, and then after that, his value. It's not that it would completely go down, but I think one of the things I would say with that value is if he didn't, let's say Arsenal went for him and he had 2 years where he got 20 goals in the league. And you could still, in our system, you could still get a lot of goals and not quite be the solution for certain games. That doesn't mean that he's the problem. That maybe that he is, but we could then, in that scenario, still sell him for a good amount of money because we didn't. You're not going to be buying him for 80 million plus. Whereas if someone does very well in the Premier League, you can probably get back the value or even more. Who knows? Maybe any of these strikers at Saudi might come in and bid a crazy money for someone, and to get the main number 9 off Arsenal would be a big statement for them. So who knows what could happen? But yeah, I think it's a good value personally. I think it's maybe slightly high, but it's Sporting, and he's their main guy. He's one of their best strikers ever. If so, fair enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, one of the things I've said about before is there's not a lot of value in the attacking market. If you look at the strikers that have moved over the last 5 years, there's been big fees paid. Even if you look at Gonzalo Ramos, who we discussed a couple of months ago, going to PSG, it was a monstrous fee that he signed for. Darwin Núñez, another one. But you look even closer with Richarlison and Solanke and those kind of players, even Brennan Johnson, what Spurs have spent on those attacking players, big fees. And the value isn't there in that market. It's something I think Arsenal fans are going to need to get used to this summer, is that the fees for attackers starts much higher than defenders or midfielders. It's the minute you get further up to your match winners, the more it costs. And I think that's very much why Arteta has built his team from the back forward, because you can go and be shrewd in the defensive market. You can go and get those players that will deliver and make your team extremely difficult to play against. But by contrast, you can go out and get a striker, and it's a flip of a coin, if we're being completely honest, about whether they settle or not. Even if you look at Arsenal, we had Aubameyang, Lacazette, and Pepe that we bought within the space of a couple of years. I think it was actually within a year we bought the 3 of them. So we bought, or maybe 2 years, but we bought them during a very short space of time, and we went backwards because we ignored the rest of the team, and that was over 180 million pound worth of talent. We paid a lot of money for those 3. They were 3 good players, but they weren't good enough. Aubameyang, with as the exception, the other 2 weren't good enough to platform us to the level that we could ignore the rest of the team. But you mentioned before the journey that players go on to get to where they are, and how it kind of brings an aggression and a fight and those things that you can't teach or coach. Talk to me about Gyökeres' journey to date.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that just assume stuff or whatever based on if I make one post about a player. But I've watched Gyökeres since he was at Coventry. Championship is a league I've always loved and watched a lot of. Even the fact that my local, I know Forest in the Premier League now, but they're my local, so I've always been interested in how Forest are doing. What family support Leeds as well, so I've always been looking at the league as a whole. And he's always someone. Those last 2 years, he was really good for Coventry, and he's the type of player where, in that system, where they would just, those kind of like those teams where they just hopeful channel punts, they just hoof the ball up to the striker and say, just make something happen for us, go win us a game. And they sit back and defend. A lot of the time he would do that. They would just give him the ball and he would just go score. I know that sounds really basic, but I compare it to someone like, you look at, I'm not saying he's this level for people, whatever, But you look at someone like Antonio at West Ham when Moyes was there. That's all it was about. Just hoof the ball up to Antonio and he'll make something happen. He's got more technically about him. You could argue Antonio's got more of the actual hold-up stuff. But at Coventry, that's what you saw a lot of. And Championship's very physical. It's very competitive all up and down the league. And him and Gustavo Hamer carried Hamer. I actually never know how to say his name. I always change every time I say it. Them two carried them that year. They were really good and they got into the playoffs and just missed out in the final. But he was good then. And I've always thought if you put him in a team where he got more service, similar play style, where it's the passes in behind, you got to make the most of his running power. But a similar play style, his goal output would improve. And when he went to Sporting, that's exactly what I said. I think it will suit them very well because they've got a lot of creative players, very progressive. Before that, the striker they had was Paulinho. I think he actually scored against us when we played them in Europa, but he wasn't all that personally. So you've got a system that's about the striker, but the striker wasn't very good, and you go get a striker who can make something out of nothing. He's going to improve a lot.
Yeah.
Just one other thing. Making it out the Championship is a big positive because it's a very tough league. I would argue it's way more competitive than the Portuguese league, especially if you're at one of the lower teams. So for him to do well there, and he was the top goal scorer, I think, on his last year before going, or one of the top goal scorers. I think he got about 19, 20 goals in the league the year before leaving.
Yeah, he was a lot of those that watch the Championship regularly. I admittedly don't, but I've got mates who are season ticket holders at Championship clubs, and they rate him very highly because of what they've seen him do against their teams. And the interesting thing is, you look at his numbers while he was at Coventry. Bear in mind, he had barely played any regular football before going there. And then he goes there, plays 97 games, scores 40 goals, then moves to Sporting, 102 games, 97 goals, an absolutely incredible record. There's a lot of penalties in there. But if you look at a lot of players that are putting up very, very high numbers, there tends to be quite a few penalties involved. Even Mo Salah this season, Thierry Henry hit penalties for us, Haaland. These players do score penalties. That is the reality of it, and that's a skill in itself. But he did have a tough time. People point at Brighton and say Brighton don't get rid of good players. Brighton have had plenty of good players that haven't made it there, and they've got that kind of image that if they've signed someone, they're probably worth looking at. And they've clearly got a good scouting network that they've picked him up. It just wasn't the right environment for him at the time. It's also worth noting that he went there during COVID. So there's a lot of players at that time didn't quite settle whenever he was there. Well, 2018, 2019, he had a few different loan moves and everything. And then whenever he actually was at Brighton, he just didn't get the game time. So that happens, and he's moved on and he's kicked on from there. He was at Brighton quite some time ago, so I'm not going to hold that against him. I'm more interested in what he's been doing recently. But he, as I said, very clearly scores goals. 39 goals in the Portuguese league this year in 33 matches. Got 7 assists on top of that. Played 2,804 minutes in that league. But some interesting stats from the Champions League. 8 games there, 6 goals, including 3 against Man City. But top speed, 34.55 kilometers per hour. He's no slouch, this guy. He can run. He can run into space very, very effectively. And he covered around 71 kilometers over 8 games. So it's not a huge amount of running, average 8 kilometers per match. If you look at what Kai Havertz is asked to do, it's significantly more than that. It's probably about 4 kilometers per game more. And there's a lot more running involved. Just on this, I've obviously touched on his speed and the distance covered. What do you think of that in comparison to other strikers and the transitional inevitability that Arsenal have lacked over the last couple of years of a player that can just hit those distances and really get going with power?
Yeah, he's very quick running in a straight line. Like when he's literally, it seems strange to think, but like in terms of not someone who then has to dribble, it's like if you're just running straight on transition, he's very quick. He's like steam train, build up so much momentum that people go near, you can just push them out of the way. And that is a positive on the transition for us. One of the things I would say, like we don't play transition heavy, and some people are like, oh, we don't suit that, so why would we buy a striker who does that? But I think the reason we don't play that way is because we don't have the profiles to do so. You've got to think how we play right now is about a lot of it's about probability and what's the success rate of doing something. You know, in terms of Arteta wants to keep control, but if you've got Trossard at left wing, for example, and you're playing a long ball over the top to him, or you're playing the early pass in behind to him, what's the success rate that Trossard is going to beat someone in a foot race? Not very high. So you're looking at that. Someone like Odegaard, his natural instinct is to play that through ball a lot of the time. But if he's been told, actually, no, just keep the possession there, he's going to turn back and pass around first and slowly build up. But I think if you've got someone who early makes the run early, that will like force us to play a lot quicker at times. And generally, whoever we get, the strikers that we're looking at, the wingers that we're looking at, it platforms that a lot, that we could play a lot quicker. Having someone like Zubimendi as well. If we do get him, it looks like we might, but nothing's a given yet. If we do, he's another player that can help speed it up a lot and also takes Odegaard's build-up responsibility away, so he can be positioned higher. Then you've got a scenario where you've got the guy deeper who can control the play, quickly play the pass through to Odegaard, plays it through to the striker or winger. That could be a very often way that we play. So with Gyökeres, he really suits that.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is it's quite clear the team suits him. He ranks in the 99th percentile for shot creating actions. And one of the big weaknesses for Arsenal is high turnovers leading to shots. So we win the ball a lot in the final third. We talk about Gyökeres's potential on the counter, on that transition. I completely agree that we play to the strengths of the players. I mentioned before, we have a lot of ball to feet players. Someone like Gyökeres does give you that transition threat that we don't have right now. But interestingly, one of his most famous qualities is his ball striking. He hits that ball very hard. He literally smashes the ball towards the back of the net. And he, again, ranks in the 99th percentile for non-penalty goals and non-penalty XG as well. So his numbers do stand out, even though he has scored a lot of penalties. If you subtract those penalties, you're still talking around kind of 34 goals, 35 goals from open play this season, which is an incredible record. And one that there's big scorers have come out of Portugal in the past, but none putting up the numbers that he has this season for a long, long time. He does actually rank fairly highly for assists as well. He's someone that I find he gets the ball to where he wants it to go, but doesn't necessarily do it in an overly aesthetic way or a very smooth way. It can go with the outside of the foot. It's very mechanical, very forceful, I need to get from A to B. And he also has a bit of steam train, as you said, in him. But one of the things that you and I have discussed before with Gyökeres is the way he runs at defenders. He almost smashes through them. And that's great. However, how often in the Premier League do we see that being blown up? His hold-up play is something that I do question because he doesn't really hold the ball up. If you look at one of his main instincts, the ball comes to him and he wants to spin his man. He wants to go around them. And quite often you'll see him bounce off his man, open his body, and he goes round the left and he wants to run. Almost similar to the way Bale used to run with those big looping runs round a defender. Gyökeres does it in a different way. Bale was just pure athleticism. But with Gyökeres, it's kind of like smash them, knock them with the shoulder, and then he's in, and very, very forceful. And he does create a lot of goals for himself that way. However, that is reliant on getting the ball in a certain position and the defense sitting high. What are your thoughts on that? Because that is something that can be risky in terms of the number of fouls you can accumulate.
Yeah, there's two sides to it. I think you can draw a lot of fouls. You can create a lot of fouls, but at the same time, the defenders in Portugal aren't as physical as they are in the Premier League. I don't know if you can get away with it as much as you can. So you could see him committing more fouls, but also having less success with it, which is where it's a big problem. Because there's no secret in it. He favours when there's space in behind. He needs that space a lot of the time, somewhere to run into. This part of the reason why I'm like, he's not that for me. He's not the ideal one, because there's certain parts of his game where, if it's a different game state, you don't see him being as useful. Just off the top of my head, I'm like, if someone's link-up play is like terrible, they, to me, have to have the devastating channel running. They have to be better finisher. They have to have really good box presence, because when we're playing against a low block, when playing against a low block and we're spamming in crosses into the box, you need someone who's going to get on the end of them. And let's say someone like an Osimhen, he might not be your technical link-up play and your, like some of the other names that we're talking about, but he is going to run the channels. He's going to win the headers and everything like that. Whereas someone like Gyökeres, you're like, if he doesn't have that space, that can be an issue. Because but like you're saying with the spinning players, that's definitely something that he tries to do. One thing that is positive about his movement is he favours the left a lot, and with Havertz, because he's left-footed, he likes to go to the right a bit more, and we've got a lot of left-footed, right-sided players, so he can get too much going on that side, where you've got Saka there, Odegaard there, Havertz there, and Timber. If Timber's at right back, he's not providing width, he's more inside. So you've got a load of players in a similar area. And then the left side, the left wing is just all isolated. Whereas if you get a striker, like what Gabriel Jesus used to do, he used to drift to the left a lot. Martinelli comes inside, or whoever else is on the left. That's a nice little combination there. Also creates more space for the people on the right side to cut inside on their left. So there's definitely positives about that movement. But like you said, physically, how he approaches those things. Another thing is like anticipating the contact. He doesn't do very well when his back's to goal. I've seen sometimes, those type of players where they're heavy and aggressive and strong, but they almost don't see someone coming. And because of that, they'll get whatever contact and then fall over and they're fouled, even though they're this big player. And then when they do notice someone, they just clatter into them and they go fly and you get a foul. He does that a lot. Vlahovic is similar in some ways, where you look at him and think, oh, he's a big guy, he'll be able to hold up the ball. But actually, some of the times when his back's to goal, that can be an issue.
Yeah, well, interestingly, his shots, they come from all over. He's had 139 shots in the league this season. He's not scared to shoot. We saw that when we played Sporting in the Champions League as well. 39 goals, and they literally come from all over the box. Obviously, a fair few from the penalty spot, but they come from all over the box, the edge of the box, just outside it, but they're heavily congested within it. One thing I look at is with Arsenal, there's a lot of crosses that flash across the goal and go unpunished. That's something that I think you don't need to be an exceptional player to be able to get in the end of some of these things that we're already doing. You just need to have those instincts. And I think so often we see a player reacting late instead of, whereas you see Mo Salah, by contrast, he literally just walks in and taps into the back of the net. That is something that I think we haven't seen since Aubameyang left Arsenal, where that player just literally walks in and sticks his boot, the inside of the boot, completely composed. And I think Gyökeres has those qualities. But when you look at his stats across compared to other players, he scored more goals than everyone. Unfortunately, you can't pull the data for the Portuguese league from Squawka. But when you look at his numbers, he stacks up against pretty much everyone. It's just very hard to tell if it translates from the Portuguese league to the other leagues. But just to wrap up on Gyökeres, a few questions. How do you see that his numbers translating, and do you think the championship's going to be a big kind of boost for how quickly he adapts? And secondly, what are the kind of key strengths and weaknesses, the reasons why you would do this deal and the reasons why you wouldn't?
So first one about the Portuguese league, I think I definitely think the numbers he can't replicate that in the Premier League. I don't believe he can personally. It's not that it's not that he's a bad player. It's just the level of the league is not the same. The level of the defenders is not the same. That's again, there's quality players in that league, 100%. But if you look at the general level and some of the teams he gets the bulk of his goals against, the standard is way lower. It would be like, if someone in the Scottish league, it's not the same level as the Scottish league, but if someone at Celtic went and scored 40 goals and he's scoring hat tricks every week against the people at the lower end of the table, would everyone be wanting to pay 100 million for him? I'm not too sure, because it's not really proven at the highest level. So there's a reason for that, and then you have to know what else to look for. And the fact he's been in the Champions League does help. Like I said, the pathway of a player really shapes how they are mentally. And I think one of the strengths about him is that creates that aggression, that determination he's got. Even if when we looked at the pathways of how long he was at all the teams and the appearances, there's a lot of loans where he doesn't play a lot, doesn't score a lot of goals, and then you get to Coventry and it clicks. And then you get to Sporting and it's all about him and he's the main guy. And he looks like someone that, even since he's been at Sporting, it looks like he's bulked up a lot. And you can imagine he puts a lot of extra time in outside of training. A lot of the stuff everyone's heard about him is he's obsessed with scoring goals and getting better. And the biggest positive with him, I think there is with Gyökeres, is the fact that you've got someone who wants to win everything now. You've got someone who's at the peak now. And his mentality, his how he presses from the front would suit us. The work rate, how is it as a player, how he's at the stage where he wants to win now, and he's still the type that wants to get better as well. So if there's any weaknesses in his game, and you've got a good coach that's going to be able to help him with those, then that's great. The issue for me, in terms of some of the weaknesses, is some of the things I would want him to be better at is about kind of like how he is physiologically. Like when you think of someone like Osimhen, he can't just suddenly create Osimhen's leap aerially. Like he can't get that overnight. And he's not going to be aerially as strong as him at all. It's a weakness with him. His heading's not the best. It's not awful, but when you're comparing to Osimhen, he's like elite level. I'm just referencing him because if we're talking about being the best of the best, in that area, he's the best at that. So someone who you give the ball to in the box and they will throw their body at it just to get it to score. He's got that desire to get in there and to meet the cutbacks that we don't have in our team. So that's a bonus. But in other areas, there's a lot of games where we're crossing the ball into the box. I'm like, he's not the solution for that.
Yeah, well, just on that, interestingly, Gyökeres only contests 2 aerial duels per game. That's not even like in terms of attacking in the box. That's 2 in total. Havertz and Marino win around 3 per game, and Havertz and Marino can both contest up to around 10 per game. That is an area that we need to see him work on. But just finally on that, because obviously he does have strengths and weaknesses, and we could kind of talk them all day. But would you roll the dice on him?
So just on the other thing, so with the contest, though, the only thing I would say is that's all about the play style. So from my point of view, Sporting don't play the ball in the air as much. It's just when you look at from the sample size you've got of his crosses into him, he doesn't do the best in a league where they're not amazing aerially. So, but yeah, in terms of would I, for me, I genuinely feel, I know everyone's obsessed with the striker. I genuinely feel like the left wing is more important, and the sorting out the midfield balance that we can create chances more is more important, to the level that if you get that right, any of these strikers will score goals for us. And if one of them, if Gyökeres, for example, in a year or 2 years isn't the guy who's going to stay at the club for another 5 and win everything with us, and there's limitations that we're seeing, you can go get an upgrade. You can go get another player. And he's not going to be at a crazy price. So I don't mind it personally. I wouldn't go for him, and generally, like he's a lot further down the list. I get why we'd be interested. I think there's better options personally. But like I said, if you get the left wing right and the midfield right, then he will still score goals against the smaller teams. I have doubts about him in the bigger games, in some of those scenarios, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would probably gamble. I agree with you on the left wing, and I think given the price tag, if it allows us to bring in a very strong left winger, I would gamble on Gyökeres. And to be honest, I think any of the strikers we're linked to would score goals and add that extra firepower that we need. I have doubts that any of them will be the savior that people think that they're going to be. I think it's not as simple as that. But look, thank you for coming on the show, Ben. If you want to find Ben, you can find him on Twitter at Ben_Mattinson_. And Ben does incredible threads, very detailed analysis of different players. Go on there, have a look. And if you've enjoyed this show, please drop us a like. Please give us a subscribe and check us out for the next scouting episode where Ben and I will be back talking about Benjamin Sesko.